Hey guys, welcome back. So in today's video, we're going to be continuing to work with doubly linked lists, but this time it's going to be more of a use case sort of thing. And so in this video, we're going to be talking about the is_palindrome function. And basically all we want to do is if we have a list that goes A, B, C, B, A, we want to check if this is a palindrome, meaning that if it's read forward to backwards and backwards to forward, it'd be the same thing. We want to return true in this case. And if it's A, C, D, B, we want to return false in this case because this is not a palindrome because if you read it forwards and backwards, they're two different things. And so if you guys want, pause the video and try it on your own. But if you guys need any help, come back and we'll work through it together. And so the first thing you want to do, we want to create two pointers. One that is at the start of the node and one that's at the start of the list and one that's at the end of the list. And so what I'll say, I'll name the first one cur. Cur is equal to self.head. And I'll make another variable called last, and I'll also make that equal to the self.head. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to loop through to the end of the doubly linked list. And remember, the doubly linked list ends with none. And so you want to say while last on next. We're just going to loop through to the very end of the list. And so at this point, we're going to have occur at the start of the node and last at the very end of the node. And so what we want to do now is we want to say while occur is not equal to last. So what the idea is going to be is that we have the start of the node and we have the end of the node, or start of the list and end of the list. And so what we want to do, we want to check these two, the start and the end. And if they're equal to each other, we want to move on to our next iteration. And so what we're going to do in that case is we're going to move our cur over to our next node. We want to move our cur over to the next node. And we want to say that our last is going to be equal to last.prev, so that we start to go backwards. And so we're going to keep looping through. And if last and cur equal the same node, in this case, like if the cur is the C node and the last is the C node, that means we've gone to a point where we've checked both sides of the list. So we've checked the B and A on the right side, and we've checked the B and A on the left side, and we've gone to the very middle of the node. In that case, we know that it is a palindrome because if we start to go backwards, so our cur keeps moving forward and our last keeps moving backwards. Other way. And so in any case, we're just going to be looping through everything again, even though we already know that the values are going to be equal to each other. And so that is why we have the cur is not equal to last, so that if we get to a point where our cur and our last, in this case, would be the C node, we can just end the loop there because we know it's a palindrome. And so what we want to say is if cur.data is not equal to last.data, we want to return false, right? Because we're comparing the two nodes, the cur node and last node. If the data elements for those nodes are not equal to each other, then we can just return false because we know they're not equal to each other. Then we want to say cur is equal to cur.next, and last is equal to last.prev. So one thing I want to handle for is, say we have a list that goes A, B, B, A, right? If we run this, we should return true, right? And we would, if with this while loop, we would be able to return. Let me just add, if we loop through everything. If we loop through everything, we're going to return true, right? Because A, B, B, A is read the same forwards and backwards. But the problem is that if our cur starts here and our last node starts at over here, right? We check them and we go on to our next iteration. So our last is equal to last.prev. So we move our last node backwards one node and then move our cur over one node. We check these, B is equal to B, and then we move our cur over and we move our last over. And so what happens is our cur will now be equal to this B, or it will be this B node, and then our last will be this B node. And so the problem in that case is at this point, we already know that both sides of our list are equal to each other. So we know it's a palindrome. But since we don't have anything that's specifically in the middle, like we would in an odd numbered list, in this case, since this is even numbered, the cur will go to the very end of the node, and the last will go to the very start of the node, and that's going to be a problem because that's just iterating. That's just going to be doing more iterations than we have to. And so what we want to do is we want to say we're going to move our cur over one node, and we're going to check here if cur is equal to last, we can just return true. And so what this is doing is if our cur is right here and our last is right here, we move our cur over one, right? And so now our cur and last are pointing at the same B node. And so if that's the case, we're checking this. And since this Boolean will return true, that means we can just return true all in all. Because if we check these two, that means we've checked both the first half and the second half of the list. And since they are, I guess, equal to each other, or the values line up, then we can just return true so that we don't have to keep looping through everything. And so that is, and of course we have our last is equal to last.prev because we're just moving it backwards. And if we loop through everything, then we are just going to be returning true because if we get to a point where our cur is equal to our last, say in this case we have an odd numbered list and our cur is equal to our last, so we're at the C node, we can just return true because once again we know that it is a palindrome. And so I have a couple of different combinations here, C, A, B, A, C. So we'll just run this one first, or actually I'll take this one out first. Here, we'll do this. A, B, C. This should be a B, this should be an A, and this will be a C when we uncomment it. So this is what this list is what this is supposed to be. We append A, then B, then C, then B, then A. If we run our S&SCoding function, python dll.py, we get true, right? Because we're looping through everything. We check the A with A. In fact, what I'll do here is I'll print out our cur.data and last.data. And so if we run that again, we check our A is we check if our first A is equal to our last A. We loop through. We check if our first B is equal to our next B is equal to our last B, I suppose. We return true. And then remember, this is checking if our cur is not equal to our last. So when we loop through, our cur is equal to cur.next and our last is equal to last.prev. When we loop through, we got to a point where both the cur and last are pointing at the C node. So this returns false. But since we know that we've gone to the very center of our list and that we've checked both sides, we can just return true. And so that's why it returns true. And the other case I want to check is if it's an even numbered list. So it looks something like this, except we have a C in the middle instead of two B's. So if I run this, we get true. And so this is just checking the A's, the B's, and C's. And so the good thing is in this case, we don't see a BB and an AA after. And that's because we moved when our cur was over here and our last was over here. When we moved our cur over once, we moved from the left side to the right side of the list. And so we're checking if our cur is equal to last. And since it is, we just return true because we know that we're starting to loop through to the other side. And if we do that, we know that we've checked for everything and we have a palindrome in our doubly linked list. And the last thing, of course, I want to check for is just making sure we return false if it's not a list, if it's not a palindrome, and if we run that, oh, this is. So I'll say, because we got ABA, we return false in this case because we check our AA, we check our B and C, but since the B and C is not equal to each other, we know that is not a palindrome. And so that is all of the is palindrome function for doubly linked lists. Hopefully that helps you guys, and see you guys in the next one. All right, later.